Hello, welcome again to Small Talk with Lys. Hope you all had a great Veterans Day weekend. We surely did. My sister and my brother-in-law came down to New Hampshire, so we got to spend some great time together. We did hot pot together and we made dumplings, but that wasn't the highlight of the weekend. Justin left the door open at the place where we were cooking, and one of the cats got out. Four of us spent the next 2 hours walking around in the cold with our flashlight, calling out, kitty kitty, meow meow, to try and find the cat. Justin was worried sick that he caused the cat to be lost. But we did eventually find the cat, so that that just became the highlight of our weekend. Anyway, back to our podcast. Justin and Brandon are part of a Facebook group called Latter-day Lobsters and Sorted Saints, Jordan B. Peterson and the Restored. Oh man, what a wordy title, huh? Anyway, this group has many wonderful conversations about the intersection between the gospel as interpreted by the LDS Church and Jordan Peterson's discussions on psychology, philosophy, and religion. Have you ever wondered what it'd be like to actually become real friends with someone who you only interacted with over Facebook comments? Well, this is how their friendship formed with Alejandro Rodriguez. Recently, Alejandro was advertising a home study event regarding psychology and the restored gospel. After posting about the event on his congregation's Facebook page, it was taken down by his local church leaders because it was deemed too political. They talk a little bit about that and then discuss some of the parallels and differences of the restored gospel with Gnosticism. This is part one of a two-part episode. In the second part, they will further discuss Mormonism, Jordan Peterson, and faith crisis.
And today, as mentioned, we're joined by Alejandro Rodriguez. He is a devout Jordan Peterson fan, I would say. I haven't met him in person, but I've seen a lot of his posts on Facebook, and they're very interactive and stimulating and enlightening. So we're happy to have him on today. Alejandro is currently a student studying at the Utah Valley University, and he's thinking about going into psychology. He got into Jordan Peterson about the end of 2016, and he's gone down a lot of rabbit holes since then. Is that right, Alejandro?
That's a good way to put it.
Well, welcome to the show. We're happy to have you here.
No, thanks for having me.
Yeah, welcome. So we're excited to talk to another Jordan Peterson fan, because we actually met at one of the conferences. Jordan Peterson wasn't there himself, but I know you actually set it up at your house, and that's how I met Alejandro just last month. So
yeah,
cool.
No, thanks for coming, man. That was awesome.
Yeah, that was actually a really, really good turnout, and we had like a bunch of speakers. It was called Mormons Discuss Jordan Peterson, and I know you have a story about that post you made, the poster you made trying to advertise for the event, and kind of how it got shut off from your board page. And so maybe we can have you share that in a little bit. And but I thought it was a great presentation. There was 3 people. Alejandro was one of them, and we just talked about Mormonism and psychology, and we talked about like just a lot of really interesting things relating to like neurology and Pharisees, and how we're we're like related, or how we should avoid that today as present day members. And so it was just a bunch of really stimulating topics and super positive experience. But why don't you share about that was a really like interesting story about your bishop and the BYU professor, and how they kind of took off your post on Facebook. Do you want to kind of talk about that?
Yeah, that's a good place to start. So I had been preparing to host this conference for a few months. I booked it all about 3 or 4 months in advance, and it was getting time to really start advertising. I made a few digital posters to put online and to print out and put at the universities. And one of the things that I thought was a good idea was, oh, well, let's invite people from the ward, because the emphasis now at church is, oh, well, let's do a home study type of a thing where we connect with people in our ward
program, right?
Yeah, exactly. Where we can connect with people in our wards, and we can have, a spiritual experience or discussion at a home. And so my intention was, oh, well, let's invite people from the ward. I'm sure they would be interested. And I had done Book of Mormon study groups in the past. And so I designed this poster. It was a big poster with like the whole poster was Jordan Peterson, like sitting on some steps, and in big white text it said Mormons discuss Jordan Peterson, and it had the date and the time. And so I put this up on my ward's Facebook page for my YSA ward, and then so that happened, and then right after I posted it, I booked an interview with my bishop, because I needed to ask him for some chairs, so that we could host the event, because I only have so many house chairs. Mm-hmm. And so the post was on the Facebook page for a few hours, and then later that night I get a message from Facebook from my bishop saying, hey, this post has been taken down. And there were specific reasons why he took it down. And so I read those, and the specific reason he gave was that Jordan Peterson had become inherently political, and the church can't sponsor or be seen, the church can't sponsor or be seen sponsoring any type of political event for any candidate. And so they felt that because of Jordan's association with politics, it was not, it shouldn't be approved, and it shouldn't be up on our YSA's Facebook page. And so he took it down, and
Now, could I jump in here?
Go ahead.
Yeah. So I have my own opinions on this, but I want to know what you think, Alejandro. Do you think Jordan Peterson is political in any sense of that word?
That's a great question. If you read his book, Maps of Meaning, it starts with his time being a socialist. And then when you look at his rise to prominence, it all began with a political scandal. And then he testified in front of the Canadian Senate. And so he does have a political element to him, for sure. But the only thing, though, is that he's not aligned with any one party. He's not a candidate running for any type of office. And he doesn't rally for anyone or advocate for anyone. So in that aspect, he's not political. And when I had received the message from my bishop, eventually when I went to discuss this with him, I even told him, hey, here in the church handbook, it states, that the church doesn't back any political candidate or party. And so Jordan Peterson doesn't either. And so I don't see where the connection is. But I mean, you could say, if you're taking my bishop's position on this, you could even say, well, Elder Oaks is inherently political, because he was he was a Supreme Court justice. Many of his talks,
it's very a conservative firebrand kind of.
Yeah, exactly.
I wonder
liberal Mormons' heads explode.
Like if we put an ad up to Mormons talk about what is it, the bill in California, or the one in Hawaii. Would that be like taken off your Facebook page with the gay politics stuff? Like,
could be. I don't know.
Probably.
It's hard to say.
Depends who made the event, I would be guessing.
Yeah, so I mean, who knows? But honestly, like going into this conference, I've met like a bunch of so we basically have a Facebook group for this page. It's called Latter-day Lobsters and Sordid Saints.
Discuss the restore. No, wait. Discuss
Jordan
what is it
Peterson,
called?
Latter-day Lobsters
Discuss
and
and the
Pharisees.
and the restored. It doesn't. Yeah, I can't remember
Well,
the exact.
I think it was supposed to be in the restored gospel, but the
Yeah.
admin made a mistake typing it in or something, and then Facebook wouldn't allow him to edit it for so many
For a
so
couple
many
months,
days.
I
Yeah,
kind of like it. I like the sound of the restored.
and the restored.
Right. But I basically I've talked to these people on the Facebook group, and it's a fun group. If you're interested in Jordan Peterson, you should check it out on Facebook. It's a private group, but you can request to join, and you'll get accepted almost certainly. And like, we don't like discussing political stuff on there for the most part. It like the way I was introduced to Jordan Peterson was his biblical lectures, and I had no idea what his political views were, honestly, even after listening to like several tens of hours of his lectures. I still had no idea if he was a conservative or a liberal or what he was.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of the theme of this meeting, I think, right? We weren't even trying to discuss political topics.
Right. I mean, within the Jordan Peterson group we have on Facebook, the majority of our discussion include things like alchemy and Jung and depth psychology, cognitive behavioral therapy, philosophy, obviously Mormonism, and our doctrines and stuff like that. It does, the group is a very open group, and so you can talk about almost anything, and politics does come up. For example, anyone who joins the group, if you mention libertarianism and anarchy, like, you're gonna get you're gonna get a bunch of flame war started. So I highly recommend
That's
against
true.
that.
I heard of the group because I was part of one of Morgan Aldis's other groups. He's the one that started this. So I know there's a lot of anarchists and libertarians that joined from there. So you'll definitely have a lot of people jump on, and if someone mentions anything about those topics.
Right.
Yeah, you'll get some crossover. But I think the point of this was the meeting was not supposed to be inherently political. And I don't think Jordan Peterson, I wouldn't consider him inherently.
At the same time, I can kind of see, like, someone as an outsider who doesn't know Jordan Peterson, hasn't listened to hours of his biblical lectures, they would see him as political, because the people that kind of pushed him, to fame or whatever, were people like that were more conservative, like Ben Shapiro or Steven Crowder and stuff. These were the people like, look at this brave Canadian professor pushes back against the liberal crazy leftists or something,
Mm-hmm.
So I could see why people are kind of like, if they don't know him, they're like, oh yeah, he's totally political. I've never heard of him besides from Ben Shapiro's mouth.
Yeah.
So there's probably that element of it.
Well, it's really interesting. When I spoke to my bishop about this, at one point during the interview, he said, "Oh, well, this is the first time I've ever heard of Jordan Peterson," and I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah.
And I'm like, "Well, you seem to know enough to make a decision, right?" But one of the things that's interesting about my ward and about my the bishopric that I'm under, let's say, is that the ward clerk is he's a Canadian, and he's also a professor at BYU, and he's also very, very left-leaning. If you look up his Twitter, which I won't divulge here to protect his privacy, but I think from his perspective, anything associated with Jordan Peterson is going to be associated with all the politics that's going on in Canada, and all the, I guess, trouble Jordan Peterson has been involved with. So I'm sure he will served. Well, okay. My suspicion, anyways, is that he was the bishop whisperer and said, "Hey, this is a little too political for our YSA ward."
Yeah, I see.
I mean, it would make sense, because if the bishop doesn't know who Jordan Peterson is and he requested it to be taken down, then unless someone else reported it, I guess that's a possibility. But you said he's the first counselor, right, in the ward?
Well, he's just a ward clerk. So
a ward clerk, okay.
Yeah.
And does he teach in the social sciences at Brigham Young?
Yeah, he's in the sociology department.
Okay, and we know most of those are going to be, even at a school
they're
like
they're
BYU,
all capitalists, and
they're going to lean left,
right?
I mean, from speaking to my friends and sort of the talk you hear, I mean, most sociologists lean left, and that's a pretty standard thing.
I think all the history class and stuff that I took at BYU, they were pretty left-leaning. There was even a club that was a Marxist club, and they made these T-shirts at BYU that were sociology department, the class struggle, and they were like, yeah, it was. I was like, what? And they
Yeah.
wouldn't let us make a libertarian group at BYU, but they let this Marxist club.
Really? They didn't let you?
Yeah.
Oh,
It
yeah.
wasn't really a Marxist club. It was the sociologist club. But yeah, they wouldn't let us make a libertarian.
They made us restricted to the young
It was
Young Americans
for Liberty.
Oh,
yeah.
you're kidding.
but we couldn't have a actual political group. But like, no problem with having leftists. It's probably a good mixture at BYU because they're so most of the time.
Yeah, that's
all your
true.
classes are right.
It'd be
The
interesting. I think it's.
I have no problem with that. Or you can have your Marxist group. You can have whatever group you want. Does it like? But as far as pulling down someone's page on Facebook because of your personal views, I that kind of seems unjust to me.
I mean, I could see it happening, let's say, in a family ward, right, where there's a lot more people, which increases the probability of offending someone. And then,
Yeah.
Family wards tend to be sort of sensitive about hot topics. But within a YSA ward, where everyone's sort of like a college student and open to new ideas, or at least we hope that's the case, I would think, oh, yeah, well, it should fly, And plus, I mean, in YSA wards, no one lives there with their family. Everyone's sort of like their own island. You don't make the tightest friends at singles ward. And so I figured opening my home and hosting an event where members of my ward can come and like have some snacks and listen to people speak. I thought that would be a positive thing, but I don't know. My bishop, I guess, felt differently about it, and that's fine.
Yeah. Well, I honestly think that's a positive thing. I think a big struggle for a lot of college students is that they're going through a transition stage in life, and they probably have a lot of questions, and they want to discuss things that you typically can't discuss in Sunday school or at church. And so I think that was kind of the purpose of these Come Follow Me programs also, was to provide that environment. And that's kind of what you were providing in your ward. But let's talk about then, what was the response of your bishop after you went in and talked to him about that?
Okay, yeah. So, like I said, I had booked an appointment with him earlier that day before he had reached out to me about taking down the post. And so later that night when he did take down the post, he said, hey, if you want to talk about this, feel free to come by my office. So I went Sunday morning, I got dressed up and I went. And my intention originally was to speak with him about getting the chairs for the event. But once I arrived at the church and he saw me, he knew like, oh, this is going to be about the post. And he said, hey, you want to talk to me about the post? And I said, well, I wanted to talk to you about something else, but now we have to talk about the post. And I could tell that he was very nervous, very unsettled by the fact that we were meeting about this post. Maybe he felt that this was going to be a contentious type of a thing.
Yeah.
And so I was in his office, and then, we started with a prayer. He asked me to give the prayer, I guess to invite the Spirit, drive contention away. And
the Spirit is apolitical.
Yeah. And then you guys, yeah. Okay.
And so we started talking about the event that I was hosting and why he took it down. He told me that he felt that it was too political. And I had told him, oh, well, this isn't a political event. This is more about psychology. Maybe I could have made that more clear. If you want to take it down, that's fine. I'm not here to argue with you or to make a big hubbub about it. I'm just here letting you know what I'm about. And then I also said, hey, I also don't want anyone else to think that I'm trying to be some sort of activist or something within the ward. And then, so I explained to him, okay, this is a psychology themed event. I had speakers who had studied psychology that were going to be there and stuff like that. And then every time he brought up the event or anytime he had to speak about the event itself, he always referred to it as a political event. And he did that about 3 times.
Okay.
And so I said, whoa, hold on, Bishop. This is a political, now I'm slipping up, but I said, Bishop, this is a psychologically themed event. It has nothing to do with politics. And then he was like, oh, yeah, okay. But so I don't know, maybe it was easier for him to categorize it as a political event for whatever reason.
Yeah. I think we should have redesigned. Well, I think you did redesign the posters, right?
Yeah. So I redesigned the poster. I got rid of Jordan Peterson's image, and then I made it more generic. I put like a picture of a brain and the light bulb, and it said things like psychology and the restored gospel. And then I put themes like, oh, we're going to be talking about neurology and the meaning crisis and philosophy. And then during the interview, I said, hey, look, Bishop, I don't want to make your job any harder than it is. Next time I have an event, let me approach you with the poster, and then you can tell me whether or not it will be approved to be placed on our YSA's Facebook. So I redesigned the poster. I made it as neutral as I could, and then I even put in parentheses, this is not a political event. And I texted my bishop, and I'm like, hey, what is this cool to put up on our Facebook? And
he's like, sorry, no political events.
Well, this time he just said, no, sorry, I don't feel comfortable doing that. And I was like, man.
Yeah. Oh, really?
Yeah. So
still didn't let it.
He still didn't let it. Yeah. And I don't know why. And I didn't ask him any more questions. I just said, okay, thanks.
Interesting. So is it fine now with the bishop when you see him, or is it a little awkward, or?
No, I think it's cool. I mean, I don't know. I'm not super tight with my bishop, and I try not to burden him. So
yeah.
I mean, he's really friendly at church and stuff, and like, there's no beef, which is good.
Yeah. Well, that's very interesting. That's a good start, I think, to this discussion. But should we dive into a little bit more of some of these topics that you did cover, or that you want to cover about Jordan Peterson and Mormonism and stuff?
Sure.
All right. Well, where should we start? Do you want to start with some of the articles that we did read before, or how do you want to get this started?
Well, real quick, I do want to make a comment on eating, just in case people are listening to this and thinking, well, how political did it get? Or
good question.
There's another, view. If you do these types of afternoon gatherings, it's going to be like, oh, we're going to have all sorts of false doctrine taught at these. And so I actually brought one of my friends, and he is he grew up in the church. He's super Mormon to the T, served a mission.
He would get mad at you for saying super Mormon, wouldn't he?
Oh, sorry. Super. Yeah, that's right. He's
super member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
That's right. Right. That's a very good point. Very, very.
Just kidding. I love the guy. He's a nice guy.
And yeah, like he wanted to be a seminary teacher and stuff, and he was great. But he showed up at the event, and his report was. I asked him. I was like, "So, how apostate was it?" And he was like, "I didn't see any apostasy there." So,
Alejandro, that means it wasn't good. It had to be. You need to get like a 5 out of 10 on apostasy. Then it's getting really juicy.
Okay. So here's what's the juiciest part. So everyone who runs into me, who didn't go to the conference, always asks me, well, how political did it get? And my response is, okay, we did talk about the Nazis, dun dun dun, right? And then we did talk about. I don't know if this is considered political, but we did talk about people like Sam Young and Kate Kelly.
The ordained women.
Yeah. And so they have a political element to what they do as well. So other than that, I mean, I don't think it got political.
Yeah, and even those were just mentions. We didn't even dive into the topic of ordained women or anything like that. It was more to start the discussion of the gospel topics that we're talking about, actually. And I had a great time. He had a great time. He actually came out pretty edified from all the information that was presented that day. So we enjoyed it. Yeah,
that's awesome that you're doing that. Do you have more events coming up, Alejandro?
I'm speaking with a few people from the group, and we're thinking about doing another one maybe in 3 to 4 months. But we'll see how everyone's work schedule and travel schedule is working out. A lot of people from the group were bummed that they couldn't make it because they were traveling for holiday or for family.
Right.
But there is a video for anyone that's curious about the extent of politicalization or apostatization in this meeting, right? That you recorded.
Yeah,
Oh.
so we did record all the speakers, and they're being edited right now. And
Okay.
they should be done and uploaded by the end of the week. So
Cool.
I'll give you a link to that.
Okay,
Sounds
cool.
good.
Yeah, and
we'll
we'll
have that.
probably, if you want to see it, you could message me or Justin, or I think join the Facebook group. It's
We'll just
funnier.
have the link on the show notes.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah. So, okay, yeah, let's dive into some of the topics that were discussed there, or whatever you want to talk about today. Was there anyone in particular that you wanted to start with, Alejandro?
No, I'm here to answer your questions. So just ask me anything, and we'll go from there.
Okay.
Hey, cool.
Let's see here. So, people listening to this probably have a good idea of Jordan Peterson. They have a good idea of Mormonism. How would you define Gnosticism?
Okay,
Which
great question.
Mormonism has commonly been called American Gnosticism.
Okay, great
or
question.
American Gnosis, yeah.
Right. So Gnosticism it's a certain style of Christianity that emerged several centuries after Christ's death and resurrection. Gnosticism isn't like a type of it's not like a specific sect, like let's say Calvinism or Methodist or something like that. It's more like a style, kind of like fundamentalism is sort of like a style that has
Yeah.
a lot of denominations underneath its umbrella, let's say. And so Gnosticism was a style of Christianity that emerged, and what gnosis means is knowledge.
Okay.
And not just any type of knowledge, but a specific type of knowledge. John Vervaeke describes it as a participatory type of knowledge, where in order to know, you have to participate. And so Gnosticism was all about participating, and sort of they would do things like try to evoke spiritual experiences and visions and prophetic experiences and things like that. And by going through, let's say, a Gnostic training or discipleship, you could also experience gnosis. And then the goal was to, I guess, in order to overcome suffering in the world and in order to overcome ignorance, you would go through these gnosis or these Gnostic practices and then experience gnosis, and then I guess get closer to salvation that way.
And so where are people, or at least in the past, where are people practicing this? Is this, because if it's not a sect, then they don't have a church, right? This is kind of more like a philosophy in general that people can hold at the same time while they're a Christian or a Buddhist or a Jew. Is that correct?
No, yeah, exactly. So Gnosticism goes all the way back to Jewish traditions, specifically one called the Kabbalah. And now when people hear the word Kabbalah, they think, oh no, esoteric, satanistic stuff. But really, Kabbalah is a Jewish tradition that's persisted for a long time. And then when Christianity arrived, that sort of same tradition evolved along with Judaism into Christianity. And so Gnosticism has deep roots in Kabbalah. And then so historically speaking, the Kabbalists were the first ones, and then things like Hermeticism came in.
Wait, who was the first one? The capitalists?
No, the Kabbalists. So they're the ones
The
that study
Kabbalists.
Kabbalah.
Okay,
Yeah,
got it.
Kabbalah. Yeah.
Got it.
Okay, so there's a bunch of strains. So
it sounds similar to, like, I've heard of Gnosticism. I know a little bit about it, but like Sufism, like the mystical branch of Islam, they're kind of more of that experiential, don't get so hung up in the dogma, but more of the experience of that divinity with God and stuff. It sounds kind of like a Sufism branch of Christianity and Judaism, but in the Islam strain. But
yeah,
have you guys heard of Sufism?
I haven't heard of Have you heard of Sufism, Alejandro?
Sufis.
I when I was reading preparing for this, I didn't hear about it. So I don't know. Maybe I missed that.
That's just something that couldn't.
No problem. But I guess the reason why we're bringing this up, I was trying to think, as a Mormon, I've someone growing up with listening to all the all the doctrines of Mormonism for many years. Things like the felix culpa, which is Greek or Latin for the fall being a positive event.
Joyful. Yeah.
You know, there's other, you know, a pre-existence. The spirit is actually matter, but just we can't see it with our untrained eyes. There's a lot of very unique, you know, at least for all the core organized religions of today, there's a lot of unique perspectives that the Mormons hold. But listening to Jordan Peterson, I was kind of surprised to see so many of these views espoused also by him, not in contempt, but actually in support of these views, like the positive view of the fall. And I was trying to think, what is the connection behind the theological roots of Mormonism, or at least the doctrines of it, and Jordan Peterson's biblical teachings, or at least his exegesis on the Bible. And what really struck out to me was reading the materials on and the stuff that you sent us about Gnostics. There was a lot of similarities in that, like the view where the fall was actually a good thing because the creation wasn't perfect. It wasn't fully good. Actually, I think they claimed it was actually an evil God that made the garden, which obviously that Mormons wouldn't believe.
Right.
But it wasn't good enough, and so they had to fall to escape the garden. Do you have anything to say about that?
Well, yeah, so when you first start learning about Gnosticism and when you first start delving deep into Mormonism, the temptation is to connect the two super closely. When Harold Bloom said that Mormonism was pure American gnosis, he didn't really mean that Mormonisms are, or that Mormon and Mormon doctrine is exactly like Gnosticism. He sort of meant that like Mormons and Gnostics sort of follow a similar pattern. And then when I gave my presentation, I was trying to make an argument about how Jordan Peterson's work, and Mormonism and the Gnostics are sort of they're sort of tackling the same problem in a slightly different way, but in ways that have common ground. For example, one of the things that the Gnostics would do is they would write extra biblical texts and pseudographical texts from ancient prophets.
And what is could you explain pseudographical real quick?
So pseudographical means that you write something, or that someone writes something in the name of another author. So for example,
so that would be like the book of Moses, like Moses wrote the book of Deuteronomy.
Right, yeah.
Even though he couldn't have, because he died before Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and then right.
Exactly, yeah. And so the Gnostics would do this too, and they would write pseudographical works, and then eventually the Catholic Church would say, "Hey, no, you guys can't do this. This is too outside of our belief structure and dogmatic structure, and so you guys are heretics now." And I think the Christianity does the same thing with Mormons. They say, hey, this whole Book of Mormon, Pearl of Great Pricings, you guys are out of line. We're dispensing with you guys.
Oh.
And then Jordan Peterson, when he quotes the Bible, he disproportionately quotes from the Gospel of Thomas all the time, including in his books.
Yep.
Now that is interesting, because I've never read the Gospel of Thomas, and I didn't notice he was quoting from it.
I think is the Gospel of Thomas in the Apocrypha still?
I don't know.
I think it was actually discovered. Apocrypha.
I think it was discovered like fairly recently, like within the last century. I think it was discovered. Okay. So at the conference that I was, where I was speaking, the argument that I was trying to make was Jordan Peterson. What he's doing with, let's say, his biblical lectures and his speeches and his books is he's trying to. And this is particularly the case when he's debating Sam Harris. He's trying to take sort of what we already know or seem to know about religion and Christianity, and he's trying to reframe it. And so he's introducing more sources and a different perspective. And so what he's trying to do is he's trying to bring to your attention other things that sort of expands what's relevant to you regarding those ancient stories. And I think that's what the Gnostics are also trying to do when they're trying to write these pseudegraphical works. They're trying to sort of have this perspectival type of knowing, what would it be like to have prophetic inspiration, and then where would that prophetic inspiration lead you? And then they would make these works, these pseudegraphical works that would reframe your understanding of Christianity, let's say.
Now,
Yeah.
a lot of people get hung up listening to Jordan Peterson, and when he starts taking it kind of as an allegory, and not just the parables that Jesus gives, but Noah and the ark, Abraham, all of the figures and the stories. He takes it metaphorically, and some people get hung over that. But I think it's really interesting to analyze it that way. Of course, it could just be one aspect, or it could be the most important aspect. And I was surprised to find out that was kind of actually a Gnostic belief, right? That they take all scripture to pretty much be metaphorical at its greatest value, and that's why they have no problem writing in the name of some dead prophet in the past and pretending that he said these things, because they're trying to illustrate like a moral, right? Or like the moral of the story. Is that a correct interpretation of Gnosticism?
That's really close. It's pretty accurate. Well, one of the things that they would focus on is narrative and what narrative has to teach you, rather than, let's say, a list of commandments. And so they would not worry so much about keeping all the rules, but then they would focus on, well, what's the narrative saying? And then that's why they were inspired to write more narrative.
I see.
Yeah.
And what's the part, I was reading the part about conduct and ethics and morality, and how Gnostics are kind of opposed to the use of those terms.
Yeah, I read that. It was like there's two parts, right? In one sense, they don't believe in morality in the sense of like a creed or like a set of codes, right? Like the 10 Commandments. But they would believe in a morality that stretches, that points to the final object, which is like, why do we have the commandments? What is the stairmaster leading us to? Is that what it was trying to say?
Well, okay, good question. So one of the things about narrative is, and mythos, one of the things that I spoke about, mythos is where you ritualize or you imitate narrative. And so let's say, for example, that let's say you're 15 years old and you're trying to figure out what it means to be a good Mormon, right? Well, someone can give you a list of rules and say, well, okay, being a good Mormon means, and then let's say you go off the temple recommend questions, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
And if you do those things, if you check every item on that checklist, you're a good Mormon. And so you do those things, you keep the word of wisdom, you keep the law of chastity, and you're sort of just checking off this list. And that's a set of rules that you follow. The point that the Gnostics believe that Jesus was making when he brought his message to ancient Israel was that, okay, these lists of rules, even if you were to keep them perfectly, it wouldn't necessarily mean you're a good person, right? Because you're just being obedient, but you're not changing who you're becoming. And so for the Gnostics, religion or belief was more about becoming something greater, not just following a list of rules because you're required to, but becoming the source of I guess moral intuition is how they would put it. And so and I see the same thing reflected in how we speak about in the church. We talk a lot about becoming like Christ rather than just following rules. And then when you examine work by Carl Jung, who was deeply influenced by Gnosticism, he always brings up this theme, and he says it in a kind of a controversial way. He says, if we're going to be Christians, then we all must become a Christ. And what he means by that is, you have to imitate the example that Christ gave and become, like him in your own kind of way. And so when you think about, okay, well, what does it mean to be like Christ? Well, being like Christ is greater than the sum of all the checklists or all the items in a checklist that you have. And
Mhm.
so you're aspiring to like a greater moral plane, let's say, or moral practice.
Yeah, perfect. You brought up
Got it.
some really good points there. I actually want to flesh out some of those points you brought up. I think the first one was the one when Jesus came, there was the Pharisees, right?
Mhm.
And that was one of the lectures, actually, the second lecture at the conference. We
Mhm.
had, it was basically a discussion about how the Pharisees were following all these hard, fast rules. And then Jesus came and kind of overturned a lot of the rules, like the strict observance of the Sabbath day. And I guess you could help me understand this a little better. The Gnostic view on Jesus as a figure is that he is one of several people that are sent by the ultimate God, Father, the unknown Father, when things are going backwards or wrong or not in the right direction, and he's sent to correct it. Is that the correct view?
Yeah, it's pretty close, I guess, for this discussion. One of the things that the Gnostics believe is that so this is where we have to be careful. So let me just start by saying Mormons and their doctrine isn't exactly
Like
like
Gnostics.
Gnosticism, right?
Yeah.
But there's a pattern of behavior that parallels them, which we can get into later. And so Mormons don't believe this. So regarding what Gnostics believe specifically, which I outlined in my talk, was they believe that creation is inherently flawed because its creator is inherently flawed, and that's what they would call the demiurge. And then the demiurge is sort of what we're familiar with. The Gnostics would identify. Now, again, I'm not saying this. The Gnostics are saying that that demiurge would be someone like Jehovah, right? And you can read the Old Testament, and you can sort of see kind of how capricious the Old Testament God is. Now,
So they're trying to justify all the horrible things that appear to happen in the Old Testament by God, right? Where like he's telling them to go out and kill other tribes and
Right.
murder their
right,
sacrifice, make human sacrifice, stuff like that, right?
right, and so they attribute all that to this. Let's say maybe not ignorant, but he's not omniscient creator, God, overlord type thing. And then this unknown father is like the most pure, most intelligent, like true creator figure. And Christ for the Gnostics is someone who was sent by that creator to bring gnosis to the world.
But so in the Gnostics worldview, is the demiurge in opposition to the unknown Father? It's not. It doesn't seem like it's like a Satan figure or the Lucifer. What is it
Mm-hmm.
exactly?
I think it's something more like an offshoot of his creation that just has a bit more knowledge than us, but not as much as the other one. And then he created this world, and we're placed in it. And I don't know, I don't know how coherent the Gnostic worldview is.
Yeah,
And I'm definitely not going to advocate for it,
got it.
because obviously for us that's heretical. But the thing that I think where Mormons and Gnostics sort of touch base on is that Jesus provides like this ultimate example by which we should imitate, or by which we
Yeah,
should orient
yeah.
our lives and imitate that figure.
And I think there's another part. So like obviously none of Joseph Smith's theology that he brought is not going to be same an exact carbon copy of Gnosticism, because first of all, Gnosticism is not a theology, I think. But I think there was a really strong point made in in the Pharisee talk, and it was kind of connecting the resilience and kind of fear of creeds that we have in the LDS Church.
Thanks for listening. Stay tuned for the second part of this episode next week.